All right, the gross episode, right? We're really doing this? Okay, so we've been having a blast with this channel over the last year and a half, and if you've enjoyed this content, we just want to thank all of you Seven-a-Maniacs so much for coming along on this ride with us, but we're gonna have to apologize in advance for this one because it is gross. And no, it's not about like bloody matches or horrific injuries. Goodness knows that could be a list all by itself. No. Get ready for bodily functions, gross foods, and more. Because I'm Singer Siete for 7 Wrestling, and let's take a look at the grossest real moments in WWE history. Now, before we get into this, we appreciate your support, so if you enjoy this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and back elbow that notification bell. Also, Gordon Holmes, the guy who does all of my Singer Siete art, has released a graphic novel about pro wrestling. It's called The Bad Guy from Legacy Comics. It's a heartwarming tale of wrestling and marriage. You're gonna love it. We'd appreciate it if you'd support him. He's done so much for us. You'll find a link to purchase this graphic novel in the description below. Number 1. Beautiful Dreamer. Has any wrestler had the arc that Tommy Dreamer's had? He started out as a pretty boy dork in ECW with green suspenders. Oh, look at that jacket. But from there, he'd dig into his extreme side, become the innovator of violence, and enter into a bloody, legendary feud with Raven. And the women? The women loved him. He dated Francine, Beulah McGillicuddy. Heck, he dated Beulah and Kimona at the same time. In storylines, at least. Then he came to the WWE and he helped the ECW side of the invasion, winning the Hardcore title, eventually winning the Reborn ECW title. 2002, he got a very different gimmick. It was gross. It started off with vignettes of him doing weird things like brushing his dog's teeth and then brushing his own teeth with the same brush. He'd shave his tongue. He'd drink cups of water out of the toilet, because toilet water's colder. Ugh. He'd eat a hot dog off of the floor, which honestly isn't that big of a deal. I've got a toddler that does that kind of stuff all the time. But finally, The Undertaker would have enough of these shenanigans. Yeah, us too, man. But to put an end to it, he would make Tommy Dreamer drink a cup of his tobacco spit. Dreamer would resist at first, but once he gave it a shot, he liked it. Mikey likes it. Fortunately, Taker would then put Dreamer and us out of our misery by beating some sense into the ECW original. Number 2. Oftentimes you'll hear people talk about the Attitude Era saying it was just sex and violence, but there was more to it than just that. It was also really juvenile humor. Take, for instance, the October 11th, 1999 episode of Monday Night Raw, where for some reason, The Rock invited some Georgia Bulldog mascots to the event. And when Vince McMahon forced The Rock and Mick Foley into a tag team match with the British Bulldog and Val Venus, The Rock put Mick to work scooping up all of the dog's droppings. During the match, the People's Champ would bring a big tray of doggy doo into the ring and proceed to rock bottom the British Bulldog right into the poop. Now, there is some debate as to whether or not the poop was genuine, but Davey Boy's daughter Georgia was told by The Rock himself that the feces was the real deal. In a Heavy.com interview, Georgia would say that the People's Champ told her, "No, that was real. We could smell it from so far away, and your dad was getting all ready for the match, baby oil pumping up and stretching, and he's like, 'That's dog shit. I'm gonna have to rock bottom in that?'" And your dad's face just dropped. So, why did this all happen? Well, according to Bruce Pritchard, Vince McMahon would say, "There's nothing funnier than dog shit." Yeah, that is very on brand for him. Number 3, Boogie Chews. Is that headline too weird? Too ambiguous? I was thinking like, I wanna put on my Boogie Chews. What, do you have any Casey and the Sunshine Band fans out there? Anyhow, it's possible I'm stalling here, because what can you say about Marty Wright's alter ego, the Boogeyman? He was a gimmick straight out of a horror movie who shimmied to the ring while carrying an oversized clock that he used to smash over his own head. Also, occasionally, he'd be joined by his buddy Little Boogeyman, which reminds us, how do you make a handkerchief dance? Put a little boogie in it. Okay, yes, I'm absolutely stalling. All of that spooky merriment aside, what really got our stomachs churning was the way he would devour handfuls of real worms during his matches and vignettes. And I know what you're thinking, Señor Siete. Worms are a wonderful source of protein, certain fats, micronutrients, and yeah, maybe you're right, but my goodness. What's worse is sometimes he'd stick them in his opponent's mouth. Like, job me out to Ted DiBiase any day of the week. At least that dude will stick some cash in your mouth. Ah well. It still isn't nearly as gross as the time he ate Jillian Hall's mole off of her face. Number 4. Prime Time Puker. We're not going to pretend that Titus O'Neal isn't a national treasure. The time he accidentally slid under the ring during the Greatest Royal Rumble was easily the highlight of that entire event. He's the only person to ever be actually suspended for trying to get Vince McMahon to act like a decent human being, but we certainly could have done without what happened on the November 29th, 2013 episode of Friday Night SmackDown. It was the day after Thanksgiving, and Vicky Guerrero was hosting a Thanksgiving leftover party. As part of the festivities, there was an eating contest between Titus and the great Khali, and holy moly, Khali looks like twice as big as Titus there. Surprisingly, Titus would pick up the victory, and his reward was a one-on-one match against Antonio Cesaro. Oh, I remember he had a first name. And you can probably guess where this is heading. During the match, Titus was clearly having abdominal issues. It did not make things better when he found himself on the business end of a Cesaro giant swing. After the match, Titus would finally have had enough and toss his cookies into JBL's hat. He'd then hilariously put the hat on Michael Cole's head, and mercifully, they put up that clever turkey logo to keep us from having to see his puke. But if that wasn't enough, he'd also vomit directly onto Zeb Coulter's head. Yeah, it was really freaking gross, and honestly, they're lucky this didn't become like a Stand By Me situation and turn the entire arena into a complete and total barfarama. Number 5. Dairy Air. The Attitude and Ruthless Aggression Airs love them some diva matches with unique stipulations. Lingerie pillow fights, evening gown matches, wet and wild matches, paddles on a pole matches. But the bouts we'd seem to see the most was when two buxom ladies would roll around in a bunch of crap. Now, traditionally, these kinds of matches are held in bars and feature mud or baby oil. So I've heard. But being as this is an entertainment company, the stuff that they rolled around in would change based on the whims of an old psychopath. So we saw chocolate pudding, gravy for Thanksgiving, and around Christmas we actually saw an eggnog match. Happy birthday, Jesus! It was on the December 24th, 2001 episode of Monday Night Raw where the then Duchess of Dudleyville, Stacy Keibler, would face off against Tori Wilson in a waiting pool filled with eggs, heavy cream, vanilla extract, and other things. Now, there's always the question of if what we were seeing was the real deal. You know, photographers substitute Elmer's glue for milk in photo ads all the time. But Stacy does dip her fingers into the concoction and taste it before the match, so maybe it's real? And if it is, that is really disgusting. How could they possibly properly refrigerate this mess? And honestly, the more I look into this, the less I think it's refrigerated. Neither Keibler nor Wilson seem like they're shivering for being covered in this stuff. It's also possible that I'm reading more into this than anybody else has ever done. Let's move on. Number 6, Sloppy Shop. Alright, confession time. Do you want to know why I even made this horrible video? Because of a recent interview that took place on the Undertaker podcast with the fella who played Midian and Phineas I. Godwinn, Dennis Knight. During this podcast, Knight would talk about the most infamous slopping that he and his partner, Henry O. Godwinn, had ever participated in. What is slopping, you may ask? Well, if you couldn't tell from the acronyms for Phineas I. Godwinn and Henry O. Godwinn, it was the act of throwing a bucket of garbage at their opponents, much in the same way you would feed a pig. Now, when Phineas was told that Tammy Sonny Sitch was going to be the recipient of the slop, he used a slightly different recipe than usual. You see, usually Phineas would just go to catering and put together this concoction using remnants from the available food like lettuce, bread, ranch dressing, etc. But this time, he filled the bucket half full. Hey, that makes him an optimist. Sorry, he filled the bucket half full, placed it in the center of the locker room, told the wrestlers that Sonny would be the one getting slopped and that nobody should mess with the bucket. Then he left. When he returned sometime later, the bucket was overflowing with God knows what. You see, Sonny wasn't very popular with a large part of the locker room. A lot of people had sympathy for her boyfriend Chris Candido, as she was known to fool around with some other fellas. So yeah, when this happened on a June 1996 episode of WWE Superstars, Know that there was a little bit more than lettuce and ranch dressing in there. Number 7. Reptile dysfunction. There's an old adage in the entertainment industry that comes from W.C. Fields that says you should never work with kids or animals. Why? Because they are unpredictable and they can upstage you. Apparently, Dean Ambrose, the current-day Jon Moxley, did not take that advice to heart. On the January 6, 2014 episode of Monday Night Raw, they were calling it Old School Raw, and it saw the return of a lot of blasts from the past. We saw the Nature Boy Ric Flair, we saw Rowdy Roddy Piper, and for the first time in a long time, we saw Jake the Snake Roberts. The voice of the voiceless CM Punk had just knocked Ambrose out with the very rarely seen spinning version of the go-to-sleep finisher when Roberts did what Roberts does. Wait, not that. I meant he took a python out of the bag and placed it on his knocked-out victim. And when he pulled the snake off of Ambrose, Dean was covered in white stuff? CM Punk told him it was poop. That's probably why Ambrose couldn't stop smiling, although Roberts said it might have been something else. Wow, there is way more poop in this episode than I anticipated. Well, there's our list. Did we forget any other gross real wrestling moments? If so, please leave them in the comment section below. Also, if you enjoyed this, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and kick that notification bell. Check out the description for a link to Gordon Holmes' graphic novel, The Bad Guy. Until next time, I'm Singer Siete for 7 Wrestling saying bye-bye.